A letter to the editor of the Illustrated London News on the 17th of March 1849, sent by Mr. John Martin from Lindsay House, Chelsea, written on March the 14th, 1849. Sir, your journal is so distinguished for the accuracy of its statements as rarely to present occasion for question, but the article concerning me in your last number was so unfortunate a tissue of errors from beginning to end that it can only have the effect of misleading your readers, and I must therefore request your insertion of the following particulars, which, however brief, may at least be replied on, and thus supersede the unauthorised sketches of my life which have hitherto appeared. I was born at a house called the Eastland Ends, Hayden Bridge, near Hexham, 19th of July, 1789, and received the rudiments of my education at the well-known free school of that place. Having from my early years attempted to draw, and expressed a determination to be a painter, the question arose how to turn my desires to profitable account, and it was ultimately decided to make me a herald painter, in consequence of which, upon the removal of my family to Newcastle, I was, when 14, apprenticed to Wilson, the coach builder of that town. I worked with him for a year, in no small degree disgusted at the drudgery which, as junior apprentice, I had to endure, and had not been allowed to practise the higher mysteries of the art, when, just previously to the expiration of the year, from which period I was to have received an increase of pay, one of the senior apprentices told me that my employer would evade payment of the first quarter on the grounds that I went on trial, and that it was not in the indentures. As it had been foretold, so it turned out. Upon claiming the increase, I was referred to my articles, and the original sum was tendered. This I indignantly rejected, saying, "What! You're soon beginning then, and mean to serve me the same as you did such a one? But I won't submit," and turning on my heel, I hastened home. My father highly approved of my conduct, declared that I should not go back, and immediately furnished me with proper drawing materials, the most satisfactory reward I could receive. I worked away to my heart's content for some days, when at length, while so employed, the town sergeant came to take me off to the Guildhall to answer charges brought against me by my master. I was dreadfully frightened, the more so as none of my family were within call to accompany me, and on entering the court my heart sunk at sight of the alderman, and my master, with lowering face, and his witnesses. I was charged on oath with insolence, having run away, rebellious conduct, and threatening to do a private injury. In reply I simply stated the facts as they occurred. The witness produced against me proved the correctness of my statement in every particular, and the consequence was a decision in my favour. Turning then to my master, I said, "You have stated your dissatisfaction with me, and apprehensions of my doing you a private injury. Under these circumstances you can have no objection to returning my indentures." Mr. Wilson was not prepared for this, but the alderman immediately said, "Yes, Mr. Wilson, you must give the boy his indentures." They were accordingly handed over to me, and I was so overjoyed that without waiting longer I bowed and thanked the court, and running off to the coach factory, flourished the indentures over my head, crying, "I've got my indentures, and your master has taken a false oath, and I don't know whether he is not in the pillory by this." My family were delighted at the spirit I displayed, and at my emancipation from an occupation they saw as uncongenial, and my father at once took measures to place me under an Italian master of great merit and some reputation in Newcastle, named Boniface Musso, the father of the celebrated enamel painter Charles Muss. I remained under his instructions about a year, when Mr. C. Muss, who was settled in London, wished his father to come and reside with him, and M. Musso urged upon my parents the advantage of my accompanying him. After much cogitation, many misgivings on my mother's part, and solemn charges to our friend, it was ultimately agreed that I should join him in London within a few months. I accordingly arrived in London at the beginning of September 1806, but unluckily for the lovers of romance, I was not cast upon the wide world in quite such a forlorn and destitute condition as your contributor states, for I had a good outfit, small though sufficient funds for immediate purposes, notwithstanding my having been robbed of all my loose cash by a poor passenger in the ship, and most important of all, I was placed under the protection of kind and excellent friends. The treatment I received from Mr. C. Muss soon satisfied me that he conceived my means to be far more extended than they were. I therefore took an early opportunity of informing him that I had resolved never more to receive pecuniary assistance from my parents, who had already done enough in providing means for establishing me in London, that as my present resources were not equal to a due recompense for his liberality, I thought it only right to tell him my position. He was pleased with my honourable candour, and saying that he would do all in his power to promote my laudable intentions, immediately undertook to employ me in his glass and china painting establishment, in a department where my facility in designing and painting landscape scenes would be very useful, and from this time I supported myself solely by my own exertions, and with advantage to my employers. After a few months, feeling uncomfortable owing to some little indifferences with a member of Mr. M.'s family, I removed from his house in Wynyard Street, New Riverhead, to Adam Street, West Cumberland Place, continuing to work for Mr. Muss's firm during the day and sitting up at night till 2 and 3 o'clock, acquiring the knowledge of perspective and architecture which has since been so valuable to me. Here I remained till 1809, when I married and removed to Northumberland Street, Marylebone, thence to High Street, thence in 1818 to 30 Alsop Terrace, New Road, and thence after 30 years' residence to my present abode, and these are the only places in London I have ever lived. Shortly before my marriage, Mr. Muss's establishment broke up, and those employed in it had the option of seeking independent employment, or following the fortunes of the different members of the firm. I, of course, accompanied my friend, and was subsequently engaged with him in the glass painting carried on by Mr. Collins in the Strand, occupying my evenings upon water-colour drawings, and contriving, in odd hours, to paint in oil my first picture ever exhibited, A. Clytie, which was sent to the Academy in 1810, and rejected for want of room, though not condemned, as I afterwards learnt through Mr. Tresham. I therefore sent it again in 1811, when it was hung in a good situation in the great room. At the beginning of the following year, having now lost my employment at Collins, it became indeed necessary to work hard, and as I was ambitious of fame, I determined on painting a large picture, Sardak, which was executed in a month. You may easily guess my feelings when I overheard the men who were placing it in the frame disputing as to which was the top of the picture. The work, however, though hung in the ante-room of the Royal Academy, received, to my inexpressible delight, a notice in the newspapers, and was eventually sold, under interesting circumstances, to the late Mr. Manning for 50 guineas. The following year, 1813, I sent The Expulsion to the British Institution, and Adam's First Sight of Eve to the Royal Academy, and was again given a place in the room. My next painting, Clytie, though a picture of which has stood the test of criticism during many years, was in 1814 placed in the ante-room of the Royal Academy. The following year I sent The Joshua, which was again hidden in the ante-room. The next year, 1817, I sent it to the British Institute, where it attracted great attention, and I was rewarded with the chief premium of the year, £100, but the picture was not sold till some years afterwards, when it went as a companion to the Belshazzar. Down to this period I supported myself and family by pursuing almost every branch of my profession, teaching, painting small oil pictures, glass enamel paintings, watercolour drawings, in fact the usual tale of a struggling artist's life. I had been so successful with my sepia drawings that the Bishop of Salisbury, the tutor to the Princess Charlotte, advised me not to risk my reputation by attempting the large picture of Joshua. As is generally the case in such matters, these well-meant recommendations had no effect, but at all events the confidence I had in my powers was justified, for the success of My Joshua opened a new era to me. In 1818 I removed to a superior house and had to devote my time mainly to executing some immediately profitable works. But in 1819 I produced The Fall of Babylon, which was second only to the Belshazzar in the attention it excited. The following year came Macbeth, one of my most successful landscapes. Then in 1821 Belshazzar's Feast, an elaborate picture which occupied a year in executing, and which received the premium of £200 from the British Institution. In the next year, 1822, appeared The Destruction of Herculaneum, another elaborate work. In 1823, The Seventh Plague and Paphian Bower. In 1824, The Creation. In 1826, The Deluge, and in 1828, The Fall of Nineveh. In addition to the above were many smaller pictures, duplicates of some of the above subjects, sketches and drawings, but the most important of all was my acquiring the art of engraving and producing the illustrations of Milton, designed on the plates, for which I had received 2,000 guineas, the Belshazzar's Feast, the first large steel plate ever engraved in mozzatinto, the Joshua and the Deluge between the years 1823 and 1828. Thus it will be seen that all my greatest works, which have gained me a reputation both at home and abroad, were produced within the 11 years immediately succeeding the first fair exhibition of my Joshua, and that the bitter sayings of envious artists arose from no inertness on my part, whilst the rapid and substantial success which attended my efforts certainly warranted no supposition of any false and temporary appreciation of my merits. On fact that, of all my numerous works, I had but one oil painting in my possession, the earlier works having been purchased by the late Mr. Henry Philip Hope, the Duke of Buckingham, Lord de Tabley, Earl of Durham, Earl Grey, and others, the more recent ones by the Duke of Sutherland, Prince Albert, and Mr. Scarisbrick, to whose cultivated taste I am as much indebted as to his liberal patronage. The notice and honours I have received from foreign courts arose chiefly from the circulation of my engravings, as only 2 of my pictures have ever been seen abroad, The Fall of Nineveh at Brussels and The Deluge in Paris. The first procured me the large medal of the exhibition, the Order of Leopold, and my election as a member of the Academy of Antwerp, and second the gold medal and a magnificent present of Sevres from the King of the French. These facts show that if I had enemies amongst the artists, their aspirations did not retard my progress. However, I myself much doubt the existence of such ill feeling in the outset, though there can be little question that eventually my success, by my own independent means, raised a sufficient number of detractors. As regards the Royal Academy, I doubtless had reason to complain, for as I progressed in art and reputation, my places on its walls retrograded, my first works being placed in the great room, whereas all the subsequent, and with every show of probability, superior productions were placed in a dark hole called the ante-room. This led to my ceasing to enter my name upon its books, to my considering its laws, and to my subsequent opposition on public grounds, my quarrel being, not with individual members, but with the association itself, for I was satisfied what a body so constituted, a close and narrow monopoly, with the privileges of a royal charter and power of a public institution, could not but produce a mischievous effect on art itself. I have expressed these convictions in evidence before the House of Commons, and yet hope to see a thorough reform and all such monopolies thrown open. I have already encroached so much upon your space that I have scarcely room to account for the last 20 years of my life. Suffice it that some portion was devoted to engraving, which I was eventually obliged to abandon, owing to the imperfect laws of copyright, my property being so constantly and variously infringed that it became ruinous to contend with those who robbed me, and I was, therefore, driven from the market by inferior copies of my own works, to the manifest injury of my credit and pecuniary resources, while I may, without vanity, affirm that even art itself suffers by the non-circulation of the engravings, for, of course, neither my own plates nor the pirated copies will sell without the impulse of novelty. In consequence of the strong interest I have always felt in the improvement of the condition of the people and the sanitary state of the country, I turned my attention to engineering subjects, and 2/3 of my time and a very large portion of my pecuniary means have since 1827 been devoted to the objects I had at heart, though even here I have been objected and injured by the same objection of the inefficiency of the patent laws, and indeed total absence of real protection for original designs in engineering and mechanics. Your limits will not admit of the particulars of injuries I have sustained on this head, and I will therefore merely enumerate the plans I have set forth. My attention was first occupied in endeavouring to procure an approved supply of pure water to London, diverting the sewage from the river and rendering it available as manure, and in 1827 and 1828 I published plans for the purpose. In 1829 I published further plans for accomplishing the same objects by different means, namely a weir across the Thames and for draining the marshy lands, and in 1832, 1834, 1836, 1838, 1842, 1843, 1845 and 1847 I published and republished additional particulars, being so bent upon my object that I was determined never to abandon it. And though I have reaped no other advantage, I have at least the satisfaction of knowing that the agitation thus kept up, constantly, solely by myself, has resulted in a vast alteration in the quantity and quality of water supplied by the companies. Amongst the other proposals which I have advanced is my railway connecting the river and docks with all the railways that diverge from London, and apparently approved by the Railway Termini Commissioners, as the line they intimate coincides with that submitted by me and published in their report, the principle of row adopted by the Great Western Line, the lighthouse for the sands appropriated by Mr. Walker in his Maplin Sand lighthouse, the flat anchor and wire cable, mode of ventilating coal mines, floating harbour and pier, iron ship, and various other inventions of comparatively minor importance, but all conducing to the great ends of improving the health of the country, increasing the produce of the land, and furnishing employment for the people in remunerative works. With every apology for the length of my communication, which must satisfy you that I have never been an idle man, I remain, sir, your obedient servant, John Martin. And this was published in the Illustrated London News on the 17th of March, 1849.